So, welcome back to the Web3 Insights podcast, where we sit down with founders, builders, and leaders shaping the future of Web3. Today, I am joined by Hazel Lee, who is the co-founder of BeatSwap, which is a full-stack Web3 platform that's transforming music and intellectual property rights into real-world assets. Hazel brings a unique perspective, bridging traditional media, broadcasting, and blockchain innovation. Before launching BeatSwap, she worked across major media platforms in South Korea, translating complex crypto narratives for mainstream audiences and operating at the intersection of Web 2 and Web 3. At BeatSwap, Hazel and her team are building a transparent, decentralized IP economy that connects artists, fans, and investors, unlocking new ways to fund, own, and participate in the creative economy. In this episode, we're going to dive into music IP as RWAs, fan engagement through tokenization, South Korea's role in Web3 adoption, and what the future looks like for creators in a decentralized world. So, Hazel, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hey guys, nice to meet you and thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. To start, Hazel, can you give us a quick overview of your background and what ultimately led you to co-found BeatSwap?
So, I actually started my career in traditional media as an announcer and a broadcaster. So, my role was very focused on communication, explaining things clearly, building trust with audiences, and telling stories in a reasonable way. So, later on, I moved into blockchain-focused media, which was my first real exposure to Web3. So at the beginning, it felt very complex and honestly quite intimidating. But through interviews and constant learning, I started to notice something interesting. So the technology itself was advancing very quickly, but the systems around ownership, rights, and trust were still very broken, especially when it came to intellectual property, like IPs. So in Web 2, creators often don't really know how their IPs is being used. Settlements are slow and ownership structure are unclear. So that's where my interest in real-world assets started, particularly IP. And BitSwap sits exactly at that intersection, using blockchain not for hype, but to make IP ownership, usage, and value flow more transparent. So joining and building BitSwap felt like a very natural continuation of the questions I've already been asking throughout my career. So today, our infrastructure already supports verified IP assets and large-scale usage data across multiple channels. Building BitSwap felt like, yeah, natural continuation.
Nice. Okay. You've worked extensively in blockchain media and broadcasting, as you mentioned. How did that experience shape the way you think about Web3 adoption and storytelling?
So working in the media taught me that adoption isn't really about technology, it's about understanding. So if people do not trust something or cannot clearly understand how it works, they won't use it, no matter how advanced it is. So Web3 has incredible potential, but it often explains itself in a very technical or financial language. So my media background helped me see that storytelling isn't just marketing. It's part of the infrastructure that builds confidence, long-term engagement, and sustainable growth. So at the BitSwap, storytelling is actually strategic. So we're not trying to oversimplify the technology, but we are very intentional about explaining why it exists, who it's for, and how value actually flows. So without that clarity, real adoption just does not happen.
Yeah, of course. So for listeners hearing about BeatSwap for the first time, how would you describe the platform and the problem that you're trying to, or that you're solving, maybe even in the music industry today?
I usually describe BeatSwap as a IP infrastructure rather than a platform.
Mhm.
Transparency is a big part of the problem we're solving, but there is also a deeper structure issue. In the traditional music industry and really across entertainment, IP rights are fragmented across contracts, platform, and intermediaries. So ownerships and usage and settlements are all handled in separate systems that do not talk to each other well. So BitSwap is designed to restructure that. So we are building a system where IP rights, usage data, and value distribution are connected from the start. That's why we are full stack platform. And instead of patching transparency onto a broken structure, we are redesigning the structure itself, so transparency becomes a natural outcome. So our
Mhm.
object is not merely to provide clear reporting, but to establish a coherent, reliable infrastructure where rights management and value flows function seamlessly. This enables sustainable growth for creators, partners, and the broader industry.
Nice. So BeatSwap focuses heavily on turning music IP into real world assets. Can you explain how that works in practice and, why is it such a powerful use case for blockchain?
So I think that music is a strong starting point because it's already a globally licensed revenue generating asset with frequent usage. That makes it a very clear RWA use case. But our long-term vision goes beyond music. What we're really building is infrastructure for entertainment IP as a whole, so like music, video, content, and any other creative assets. So in practice, we treat IP as something that can be registered, verified, and tracked based on real usage. So blockchain allows us to connect ownership with actual activity rather than speculation. So music just happens to be the most immediate and understandable entry point into that broader entertainment IP economy. So this approach shifts IP tokenization away from speculation and toward measurable performance and sustainable returns. Music serves as the most immediate and accessible entry point, allowing us to demonstrate this model before scaling it across the broader entertainment IP ecosystem.
Okay, that's interesting. So how does BeatSwap change the relationship between artists and their intellectual property compared to, the traditional music industry models?
So in traditional industry models, artists often lose visibility and effective control over their IP as their work scales. So rights are licensed, sub-licensed, and distributed across multiple channels, making it difficult to clearly trace how value flows back to the original creator. So BitSwap introduces structural clarity to this relationship. So through our Oracle layer, we verify real-world usage and licensing activity, including off-chain transactions, and securely connect this data on-chain. So this creates a reliable and auditable record of how IP is utilized and monetized. So in parallel, we are developing shared ecosystem spaces where artists, fans, and contributors can engage around IP in a transparent and compliant environment. So our objective is not to increase operational complexity for creators, but to provide some institutional grade infrastructure that preserve ownership fidelity and enables safe long-term participation. So by doing so, BitSwap helps artists scale their work without losing control, accountability, or economic
Mm.
alignment.
Okay. Nice. No, that sounds great. One of the most interesting angles is fan participation. How does BeatSwap allow fans to engage with artists, in a more meaningful and economic way?
So, like, traditionally, the relationship between artist and fan has been like very one way. So artists create and fans consume and support. But there's no real feedback loop in terms of value or participation. So what BitSwap does is turn that relationship into like something more two-way. So fans are no longer just listeners. They can become participants in the ecosystem. So like through mechanisms such as licensing to earn and vote to earn, participation is linked to verifiable action, including sustained support, usage, and contribution, rather than like short-term speculation. So fans who commit time, attention, and resources are able to participate in value creation and distribution in a measurable way. And more importantly, this model is not about financializing fandom. So it is about recognizing that fans already invest emotionally, socially, and economically in the success of artists and providing a transparent, compliant framework where that investment is acknowledged and aligned with ecosystem growth. So, like, instead of a one-directional flow of attention, BitSwap creates a feedback loop where artists, fans grow together.
Nice. Nice. That sounds really good. Looking at transparency and trust, then, two incredibly important things naturally within the space that we're in. IP rights can be quite complex and, often opaque. How does decentralization and on chain infrastructure improve transparency and trust for artists, fans, and investors?
IP rights have traditionally very complex and hard to see clearly. So ownership is fragmented, usage happens across many platforms, and reporting is often delayed, which makes it difficult for anyone to fully understand how value actually flows. BitSwap addresses this by restructuring how information is verified and shared. So for artists, our on-chain infrastructure and Oracle layer make real usage and licensing activity more visible. So value creation isn't hidden behind or like delayed or opaque reports. And for fans, transparency builds confidence. So participation is tied to verified way and verified activity. So supporting an artist feels like real and accountable rather than just symbolic. And for investors, having verifiable data around ownership and usage makes IP easier to evaluate as a long-term asset instead of a speculated one. So ultimately, decentralization creates a shared source of trust where trust isn't assumed. It's more likely to it's more likely to build into a structure.
Okay. Um, awesome. Moving on, you're based in South Korea, which is, often seen as a leader in Web3 and digital culture. What makes South Korea such an interesting environment for mass Web3 adoption?
I think South Korea has a few unique strengths that make it especially interesting for Web3 adoption. So first, it is an extremely digitally native environment. So people are comfortable with new platforms and mobile first behavior is the norm and adoption cycles are very fast. So trying something new doesn't feel risky here. So it feels more likely to be natural. And second, there's a strong culture of participation, especially in entertainment. So fans do not just consume content. They actively support like creators, organize communities, and contribute to long-term success. That mindset aligned very naturally with Web3, where users aren't passive audiences, but active participants. And finally, Korea is a major IP producing market. Musics, K-dramas, films, digital content, and so on. So when you combine strong IP foundations with a like a participatory culture and digital readiness, Web3, like especially IP-based models, doesn't feel abstract or experimental. It feels like a logical next step.
Hmm. Yeah, no, definitely agree. We're seeing, growing institutional interest in real world assets. How do you sort of see music IP fitting into the broader real world asset narrative?
So, like when institutions evaluate real-world assets, their primary focus is long-term verifiable value generation. So a key difference lies in how that value is created. So like in many NFT-based model, value is largely driven by secondary market trading. So like if trading activity declines, the perceived value often declines with it. Intellectual property operates differently. So music and entertainment IP generate recurring value through real-world usage, like including streaming, licensing, and distribution, regardless of market trading activity. So what infrastructure providers like BeatSwap enable is transparency and verification of that usage. So by connecting ownership, licensing, and performance data on chain, institutions are able to assess IP based on measurable economic activity rather than like speculations. So as a result, music IP is positioned as a usage-driven real-world asset. So the objective is not to promote short-term trading, but to support sustainable assets that continue to create value through genuine engagement over time.
Okay, cool. Nice. So I want to talk about women in Web3 leadership. You're clearly a leader within Web3. What's your experience been like, building in this space? And what advice would you give to other women entering Web3?
So, to be honest, I think that I've been fortunate in that I haven't experienced the industry in a particularly different way because of my gender. So in most cases, I have found that Web3 space to be quite merit driven and focused on contribution. So what I did notice early on is that there are still relatively few women in the ecosystem. However, I didn't experience this as a disadvantage. If like anything, Web3 remains an open and evolving industry where people tend to value genuine engagement and long-term commitment more than like background or labels. So where I occasionally felt challenged was not because of my gender, but because my background is in media and communication rather than like engineering or technology. Many early discussions were highly technical, which can feel isolating if you're not like coming from a development focused role. So over time, I realized that this diversity of expertise is actually essential to this industry's growth. Web3 needs professionals who can translate this complex system into like clear narratives, connect like different communications and build trust at scale. So Once I recognized that, any sense of being an outsider disappeared. And so my advice to women entering Web3 is not to be discouraged, is like not to be discouraged by the current gender imbalance. The space is still highly community driven and receptive to new perspective. So if you're curious and committed to learning and serious about building like long-term value, there is a significant opportunity to grow and lead in this industry.
Yeah, no, completely agree with everything you said there. I think, it's as you say, a community driven and inclusive industry. I'm keen to understand what have been the biggest challenges so far in building BeatSwap, both from a technical and market education perspective.
So challenges. I think one of our like biggest challenges has been education. Concepts like IP rights, on-chain verification, and incentive design are not immediately intuitive, even for like experienced Web3 users. So we learned early that moving too fast can slow adoption. So if people do not understand the system, they will not trust it. And without the trust, the ecosystem cannot function sustainably. So as a result, we are now focusing on careful sequencing, like building what works today, explaining it clearly, and allowing the platform to evolve over time. Balancing long-term vision with practical execution has been one of our key lessons.
Yeah, amazing. Finally, looking ahead, where do you see BeatSwap in the next 12 to 24 months, let's say? What excites you most about the future of, decentralized creative economies?
So like we are preparing many things, but like over the next 12 to 24 months, our priority is to make the BitSwap ecosystem feel complete and fully integrated rather than fragmented. Um, on the infrastructure side, this means continuing to strengthen our core IP layers, including components such as Space, our upcoming social file layer, and the DAX and the WA launcher, so that rights management, liquidity, and participation are more seamlessly connected. These tools are designed to support sustainable activity around real IP usage. And at the same time, we are investing heavily in interactive spaces where artists, fans, and participants can engage directly around IP. So like space plays a key role in this strategy by providing a social and participatory environment where community engagement is directly connected to verified IP activity. These environments are important because they transform like complex infrastructure into like something people can experience and understand in practical terms. And well, what excites me most is seeing these layers come together, like from IP registration and verification to usage-based value creation through mechanism like licensing to earn and vote to earn. And finally, to the tool that enable meaningful participation. So
Amazing.
our like long-term vision is for BitSwap to function less as a visible platform and more as essential infrastructure that quietly supports like how entertainment IP is created, distributed, and valued within a decentralized creative economy.
And stuff. Well, certainly seems like you're heading in that direction for sure. But Hazel, it's been a fascinating conversation. It's clear that music IP, real world assets and fan ownership are, opening up an entirely new economic model for creators. For anyone listening who wants to learn more about BeatSwap or follow Hazel's work, we'll include some relevant links in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and share to Web3 Insights on Spotify and YouTube. Also, as well, please do feel free to share it with someone who wants to understand where Web3 is heading beyond, speculation and into real world impact. Hazel, once again, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for joining us on Web3 Insights.
Thank you for inviting me. It was really nice to talk to you.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.